What's up, everybody? Michael Walsh here. So I want to talk about Ilia Topuria and why his next fight should be against Paddy Pimblett and not against Justin Gaethje. Now, in an ideal world, in a meritocratic world, he'd actually be fighting the winner of Arman Tsarukyan and Dan Hooker, especially if it's Arman Tsarukyan. However, it sounds like they want him to be fighting early next year. They want him to be on one of the first Paramount cards. And the turnaround just is such that you can't rely on the winner of Hooker and Tsarukyan being available. So who does that leave? It leaves Oliveira, who, of course, Ilia just beat. It leaves Holloway, who Ilia also beat. And then it leaves Pimblett and Gaethje. And of the two, like, the rumors are that they're going to go for Gaethje. And sure, like, I get that. Like, Gaethje's a fan favorite. He's one of my favorite fighters. He's one of my favorite fighters of all time. Like, I was aware of Gaethje before he came to the UFC. Like, I watched several of his fights in the WSOF. And I remember just being hyped when they signed him, and I remember like just crossing my fingers that he could have some success because, especially back then, he was such a brawler. Many people were speculating, people in the know, were speculating that he wouldn't be able to cut it in the UFC, that style wouldn't hold up against elite competition. And his first match was booked against Michael Johnson, who at the time was ranked number 5, who was a legitimate, top lightweight, a dangerous puncher, and it really looked like the kind of matchup that could be poisonous for a reckless dude like Gaethje. And I remember watching that fight live with my dad, actually, and Gaethje gets rocked multiple times in the first round, and my dad, at multiple points, my dad was like, "Oh, it's over. He's going to get finished." And I was like, "No, like you haven't seen this guy fight. Like this is kind of how it goes. Like he could gut it out and come back." And sure enough, that's what happened. He breaks Johnson down and gets a TKO in the second. But in any case, like, I love Gaethje. I would feel better if Gaethje won the belt than I would if Pimblett won the belt. However, I still think they should give the title shot to Pimblett. Because Gaethje, sure, you could say it's sort of like a lifetime achievement thing to just give him a title shot or something, but he's already gotten 2 title shots. He's not looked spectacular in either of those outings. He's only 1 fight removed from getting outclassed and then knocked out by Max Holloway, who himself has already lost to Topuria. And it's like, I just can't get up for that fight, Like, sure, you're kind of interested in Gaethje's Cinderella story, but that's kind of it. Like, it would just be another example of Topuria taking out an old guy, an example of Topuria's competition just decreasing in quality as his fights go. Because you could really argue, it was best with Volk. Holloway's not as good as Volk. Oliveira's not as good as Holloway, you could argue. And Gaethje's not as good as Oliveira. It's just getting easier and easier. And that's not to say that Paddy is better than those guys either, but at least Paddy is in his prime. At least he's a fucking huge lightweight. At least he's been improving in his last several fights. At least he's really durable. At least he's really confident. At least it's a fight where, and this isn't the main reason I watch the sport, but at least the build-up would be fun. At least the verbal exchanges would be fun. At least the press conferences would be fun. At least all the videos everyone makes about it would be fun. I can at least get up for that. I can imagine the buzz I'd feel seeing those two get in the cage together. Whereas if it were Topuria and Gaethje, it would feel a little more routine. It would feel almost like a sadder version of how I felt when Merab versus Corey Sandhagen got booked, where it's this has mandatory title defense vibes to it. It's not a big fight that I'm hyped for. And again, they should be doing the Arman Hooker winner, but since they can't, I don't know why they would give it to Gaethje. And I kind of know why. They're just assuming Topuria will win, and people like Gaethje, maybe they know something about Paddy. Maybe they just don't trust his fat ass to get in shape in time, and he needs an even further out fight or something. I don't know. But, maybe they're planning on having him fight Holloway. Who knows? But in any case, if you need Topuria to headline early next year, if you need him to be on the first or the second Paramount card, it should have been Paddy. I don't get why. I don't see Gaethje as the best pick. In fact, I see him as one of the worst picks of the lineup. Of the top 4 or 5 guys they could pick, I don't, you'd almost rather see Oliveira get a rematch, honestly. I mean, sure, you want to see fresh matchups and stuff, but at least Oliveira looked amazing against Gamrot, who was himself a fresh matchup, and it was a quick turnaround. Gaethje, just rematched Fiziev on short notice and had like a close fight with him, and just like everything about it is uninspiring, aside from the fact that you can't help but love Gaethje and can't help but like hope against hope he lands a knockout or something. But I don't know. Honestly, it just sounds like a good night for like a quick finish for Topuria, and it just kind of being forgotten, honestly. Like it's the sort of fight that like years later you just have no emotional connection to. You're just like, oh yeah, I remember that happened. You know, that's like that's a name that I kind of recall is on Topuria's resume, but I don't have any strong emotions associated with that. I wasn't like, you know, I wasn't just brimming with anticipation when that came. And I'm not saying Pimblett is just the perfect platonic ideal of a title challenger. But again, at least he's young. At least he's streaking. You know, he's not lost in the UFC officially. Like, he's been looking good. He's huge. You know, so at least there's that. It would be the biggest guy Topuria's ever fought because he's, you know, frankly, he just should be a featherweight. You know, there's things that could get me invested that just are not there for Justin Gaethje. So those are my 2 cents.